Hey, well, welcome everyone to the June 2025 episode of the ongoing bi-monthly FR Panorama webinar series. I'm Larry Liberti, and together with my colleague Mario Alanis, as always, we'll be your co-host for today's webinar. And today we'll be looking into the concept of optimizing the use of regulatory reference agencies. As usual, there's so much to share and discuss, so we'll keep our introduction short. FR Panorama is an educational program of the RUD Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and it's presented in collaboration with the USC DK Kim International Center for Regulatory Science, which together bring you the FR Path project. We're most grateful for the ongoing support provided by MSD for the FR Panorama series. In late 2024, we had the opportunity to look into the question of how are reference agencies evolving to meet the needs of the evolving regulatory landscape. Well, it turns out that during that session, we explored many topics, including the role of reference agencies and how they play a role in facilitating reliance. We had a presentation from the Korean MFDS about their role as a reference agency. We talked about using reference agencies to inform decision-making from the South Africans and how novel technologies are facilitating sharing regulatory data between reference and reliant agencies. Well, as it turns out, this was a very well-attended webinar, and we received many comments that we should further investigate the topic of the importance of reference agencies. Well, we think this interest stems from the growing awareness of the desire of many regulatory agencies to be assessed against the WHO global benchmarking tool. And that's with the ultimate goal of being recognized as a maturity level 3, ML3 agency. And that's one that's characterized by a stable, well-functioning, and integrated regulatory system. That's a target, a WHO target. And here's where the WHO listed authority or WLA concept comes in. So to be a WLA, a regulatory body must meet a rigorous set of criteria that demonstrate its ability to consistently ensure the safety, efficacy, and quality of medical products. There are several key requirements, and those include being an ML3 or 4, following good regulatory practices, doing what's called performance evaluations, where the authority undergoes a detailed performance evaluation using the WHO's operational guidances and manuals, maintaining what's called sustained excellence. So this concept is where the authority should show a track record of consistent and high quality regulatory decisions and outputs, not just once, but over time. And finally, a commitment to continuous improvement. So as the list of WLAs and ML3s grow, the role as reference agencies becomes increasingly important, especially as regulatory reliance permeates global regulatory activities. And we've talked about reliance a lot over the last couple of years in these sessions. So today we're going to take a look at this from a little bit of a different point of view. Now, what do you think about that, Mario?
Well, I think it's great, Larry. It's great to be again in this session. And what an interesting topic we have today. It's much more common to concentrate on relying agencies instead of the reliant or the reference. However, both are very, very important for the well-functioning and efficient reliant process. As we know, the WHO process for assessing regulatory authorities is very rigorous and covers and assess all essential technical aspects of a regulatory functioning system throughout the product life cycle. However, are there other aspects required by the relying agencies where reference agencies can improve? Is information provided by different reference agencies similar and comparable for the same product? Can reference agencies improve communication and collaboration with relying agencies? Is there something companies can do to support this interaction between relying and reliant agencies? There are many issues related, and to better understand these aspects that where it can be improved, we have invited and we have different perspectives. First, we are going to have Dr. Asma Fawad from the Egypt Regulatory Agency, who will introduce us to what a regulatory agency goes through with the GBT process to attain ML3 status. Then we're going to be joined by Dr. Beta Perkins, who will share some real world experience of how technology is supporting agencies' interactions. And then we will be joined by Dr. Susan Osborne, who will reflect on how pharmaceutical companies support system strengthening of reference agencies. Over to you, Larry. Let's get started.
Okay, I'm ready. Thanks, Mario. Well, I'm happy to welcome back Dr. Asma Fuad to the FR Panorama series. Asma has an amazing background. She serves as the head of biological and innovative products and clinical trials at the Egyptian Drug Agency, the EDA, and she's the Egyptian representative to ICH and the co chair of the IPRP, among many other regulatory activities. Her agency, the Egyptian Drug Authority, is recognized as an ML3 medicines and vaccines producing agency, which is a very high standard. But to get to this place, her agency had to prepare, undergo, and maintain its activities as expected by the WHO and the GBT process. But today, we've asked Asma to share with us firsthand what it is like to be an agency in this valued position. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our colleague.
Okay.
Asma, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mario, and thank you, Larry, for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to navigate with you in during this episode, the EDA journey, starting from how we think and where we would like to position ourselves in the upcoming years. First, you talked during the introduction about the benchmarking and the process in brief and how the authorities are moving from maturity level 3 up to WLA and how the process, and I would like to share with you the real impact and the value of such activities. The EDA decided to start at the middle of the pandemic back in 2021. First, the impacts are in several dimensions. First, with the impact on the agency, it is a real and a standardized process for a gap analysis for the regulatory system. And it is the first step, or we can imagine it's the square number one for any authority to move to make themselves benchmarked according to the WHO standards. The process starts in brief by self-benchmarking or the self-assessment. We go through the 9 functions for vaccine or the 8 functions for the medicine, small molecules. We do our self-assessment, and then a pre-benchmark visit comes to the authority to validate our responses, and then we end the process by a formal benchmarking visit to put institutional development plan for the authorities. And this is the real value of the benchmarking process. It's a continuous process, as you have mentioned. It's a maintenance process for the system. We started by having a stable, well-functioning system, granting maturity level 3 for whatever scopes, vaccine or medicine, and this is just the beginning. It is a beginning of the journey to move from a relying authority to a reference agency one day with this sustainable and consistent performance for the world listed authorities approach by WHO. So it is the first impact on the agency and on the regulators to be assessed by WHO and granting maturity level 3. Here is another impact on the industry and the local trade associations, because it builds trust, and it attracts also technology owners to the local trade association, because there is a trust in the regulated system, and there is a trust in the produced, manufactured locally products in this country. So it is the other impact on the industry. And our ultimate goal, both the agency and the industry, is a public health. And it's real of impact on the public health, because at the end of the day, we secure safe, effective, and quality medications for our population. And also we're leveraging patient access to innovation, because during the assessment of the authority, we ensure that the reliance mechanisms are as per good reliance practices put by WHO, that make sure that we utilize our resources the best, and we save our resources for our local manufacturers, and we can ensure the patient access to innovation through the good reliance practices. This is all our impacts of the assessment process. And as I just told you, it's a continuous process. Starts with IDPs, that is followed up by WHO, and then we have, after 2 or 3 years, a re-benchmark, and then we are targeting positioning ourselves to higher maturity level, like maturity level 4, and then picking some functions who are ready to be listed and submit them for being world listed authorities in these functions. It's a journey, as we always describe. It's a journey, but it's a journey of continuous improvement and continuous development of the system for the sake of our population, for sure. I hope this this address the topic of interest for this part of the episode. Over to you.
Thank you. So, Asma, we have a few minutes, and one of the things that we'd like to know is, now that you've reached this particular level of maturity and you've been recognized as such, how do you see the value of your agency in the region? You mentioned there's a value to the local industry and the innovative industry, and also being able to bring in innovative products from multinationals through the use of things like reliance. But if I think about all of the other countries in your region, where do you see yourself fitting in? And was that a goal of your agency to have that particular responsibility?
Yes, sure. The regional and the continental, especially the continental leadership for Egypt, is very, let's say, it's promising for EDA to lead the content, because we are only, as you know, it is the only as vaccine producing and medicine producing reaching maturity level 3. And in the rising of the African Medicine Agency, based on what is all the harmonization efforts all over the continent, Egypt and the Egyptian Drug Authority is a leader regulatory organization in the African continent. And as we all know, this is the vision of the AMA, the African Medicine Agency, is to have African for Africans. The procurement will depend mainly by 2034 vision of the content, will depend mainly on the authorities who are benchmarked by WHO for maturity level 3 and above levels. So that's why it's a kind of investment. We are investing in the regulatory system strengthening, not only to meet the needs of the Egyptian local market, but also for the continental and the regional. The content is divided into 5 regions, and we are leading the North African, of course, with other authorities, but we are leaders for the content, either in the North Africa region, all over the continent, and also with the Middle East countries and the Arab drug agency as well. So it has an impact on our international and regional practice, meeting the need for both the Egyptian market and also the African market.
It's an important position to play. If I remember right, one of the criteria for the GBT assessment is, especially at ML3, is to be able to have documentation of the way regulatory decisions are made. And, when we think about the US FDA and the EMA, they have public assessment reports, as
Yes.
do other agencies around the world.
Yeah.
So is this something that your agency has or is working towards, that you would have these publicly available documents that other agencies then can use when they're looking to you as, let's say, a reference agency?
Yes. Yes, sure. Yes, sure. On EDA, our website, you can find public assessment reports for small molecules and large molecules already registered at EDA. You can also find registries for the clinical trials protocols and the clinical trial studies. And we have also so many publicly available data because, as you have just mentioned, we have the international collaboration among the content, and internationally, either internationally also, is not a luxury, it's a mandatory for authorities to share their best practices. So we have MOUs with several African countries who rely completely on EDA. So the public assessment report are available, and we are increasing on regular basis our publicly available data. We are thinking by in the 2 quarters to add more and more publications on even those for the activities of our control labs, and all the data are organized to be on regular basis publicly available to the international stakeholders, and of course for the public in Egypt.
Very,
So
very interesting.
you've positioned yourself. I was just going to finish up by saying you position yourself very well, within the African continent. Have you had any feedback from countries outside the African continent with regard
Yes.
to your position and the value that you bring to this process? Because now, we think globally about medicine availability. So, any
Yes.
experience there yet?
Yes. Out of Africa, we have MOUs with Cuba, for example, from Latin America, and as you know, we are actively participating in the international program for regulators of pharmaceuticals, and it's a platform for more than 40 authorities. We are sharing already our best practices, including reliance, utilizing artificial intelligence, and so on. So, and also participating in the working groups for several topics of interest for regulators. So we have this already collaboration. It's now a mandatory for EDA, not a luxury. So we believe in this, and we have already MOUs, like as I told you, with Cuba, and we are in regular and in continuous dialogues with several, even if we did not sign an MOU, but we are continuously communicating with all the international authorities out of Africa. Over to you.
That's great. Mario, you had a question.
Yes, very briefly. Indeed, I think it's very important and very relevant, your effort in communicating and collaborating. I've heard from some Latin American agencies that sometimes when they want to communicate with reference agencies, it's very hard for them, or they don't get response, or so. I think that is a very interesting aspect. And the other one that I think from a public policy point of view, I think it's very interesting, the impact on industry. So the fact that industry gets benefits, or local industry in particular for this, helps the country production and other aspects which sometimes are not considered, because we look most importantly health. But well, I thought to comment that.
And that brings up a really interesting point, about the way that products are reviewed. And, we talk about these facilitated regulatory pathways, and some pathways can expedite the assessment of a medicine, maybe through an emergency use pathway or a priority pathway that requires maybe more intensive assessment on your part. It's almost like a primary review. Do you find yourself, for internationalized products, for products that are coming from multinationals, to now be in a more stronger position to be able to evaluate those products and to put them through your regulatory process in a more efficient manner because of the robustness that you have now.
Okay, that's what Reliance is for. We do agree that we have to perform Reliance in an informed and smart way. We are collaborating and we are investing in our regulators to be engaged in, for example, the ICH-EWG. So they are involved in building the guidelines and involved in a consultation internally and public consultation of the guidelines. So we are there in the, let's say, in the heart of the process of international standards. So that's all empower the Reliance practice and make it an informed Reliance. And this is another impact for the communication with international agencies and for forums like ICH and IPRP. These all, excuse me, these all leverage our performance and make the performance more smarter. And for the sake of the population, we do not re-evaluate. We look at certain aspects that we need to build our own competencies to be able to evaluate our local and non-reference product in case we receive any of them. So it's no, it's two parallel ways we are working. We do not re-evaluate because it's a waste of time and efforts,
Yep.
and we do it in an informed way.
It's a very efficient approach. It's great. Thank you, Asma. Really informative.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Asma.
Okay.
We know that among our participants, there are many agencies that are preparing or undertaking the review with GBT. So if you have any questions, please post them in the chat and we will address them during our conversation at the end of the presentation. Let's take a little different approach now. Last year, we began to explore technologies that are emerging to facilitate sharing of regulatory documentation. That is a rapidly evolving field that guarantees an update and to introduce us to a project we may not be familiar with. We are joined today by Dr. Vera Perkins. Vera is the lead principal investigator for Project PRISM, a research collaboration agreement with FDA. He is also the director of the nonprofit Call to Action Delivering Health Literacy, and he's also a recent graduate of the doctorate in regulatory and quality science at the University of Southern California. Vera, we'd love to hear about the work that Project PRISM is undertaking with the US FDA to facilitate the exchange of regulatory information with other agencies. Over to you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mario. And can everyone see my slides? Perfect.
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you for the opportunity, Larry, to present. As Mario may have mentioned, many of you may not have heard of this, but I'm here to provide it. And for those of you who have, that it'll be a very informative update. But I'm Vera Perkins. I'm honored to represent the global collaborators and introduce you to something truly transformative, which is Project PRISM, which is a research collaboration agreement between industry technology partners and the US FDA. Project PRISM stands for the Pharmaceutical Regulatory Information Service Module. So as discussed today, there are a variety of different initiatives that you want to take in the Reliance pathway. And of course, technology is one of those things that can provide an opportunity, but certainly a challenge that needs to be addressed. And I'm very happy to present to you today some results where we truly believe that we have pretty much, I would say, for the most part, solved that problem so we can focus our attention on a variety of more business relevant things to advance regulatory reliance. So we are navigating these complexities of a global policy environment where there is a future where we really need to be faster about things, smarter things, connected and more equitable. So I will talk today about how PRISM is not just a concept. It really truly is a working model. It's a blueprint for how we can really reimagine regulatory science in the cloud. So let's dive in. So everyone's probably familiar with this right now. We've all imagined or had this vision where we have a world where we only need to compile and submit one application across a single global submission. And that is really the foundation of Project Prism. This is a future where data can be stored in one central secure location, accessible to a network of regulators across the globe. And in this model, health authorities don't just review independently, they collaborate in real time, sharing insights, asking questions, and aligning decisions through a common platform. And the result is really to bring therapies to patients faster, more efficiently, and more equitably, regardless of geography. So this isn't just about technology. Technology is an enabler. That is a problem that needed to be solved to basically illustrate or get to the point of what's been said by Dr. Fouad and what you mentioned, Mario, in the introduction. It's about democratizing access to medicines, accelerating that innovation, and transforming how we work together as an industry. That's the vision of PRISM, and today I'll show you how we're making that real. So let's take a moment to reflect on the broader impact of what we're building with PRISM and what we're calling these trusted regulatory spaces. Again, it's just not about improving workflows. It is about revolutionizing the submission process to accelerate the approval of life-changing therapies. So by leveraging a trusted cloud platform, right, there are a variety of things that go into it, and we don't have enough time, but should someone want to reach out, we can delve into the details of architecture and security and privacy to be able to kind of achieve what we want to achieve. We're really trying to enable seamless collaboration between sponsors and regulators. So this means streamlined regulatory processes that reduce complexity and compliance burden, accelerated review and approval, so cutting down the time it takes to bring therapies to market. I want to make a point. In this particular instance, it could very well be that maybe health authorities figure out ways in terms of leveraging technology with AI and other things that they shorten review times. But really, from the industry side, what we're trying to explore is how can we on our end upstream get to the point where we say, well, my intention is to submit this by December 2025, but because of these efficiencies gained through cloud, through technology, I was able to submit this a month sooner, 2 months sooner. And I'll get into some of the metrics on that and why that's important. Real-time communication, replacing email chains, which, and delays with instant secure interactions, but it even goes further. We're talking about testing to production, the integration of artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance data interpretation and decision making. There's a lot of activity there. Many people are exploring things. And I'm here to tell you that when you're dealing with a platform and a technology where this is basically, some of it is essentially how you connect that to your current processes and leverage those things that you've been doing in terms of those AI initiatives within your organizations. We do want to ensure that there's enhanced security and compliance to this entire cloud infrastructure. And most importantly, we're enabling improved global accessibility, so that patients, no matter where they live, can benefit from faster access to innovative treatments. So this is the kind of transformation that supports the democratization of access to medicines. It provides more efficiency in the process. It eliminates some of these artificial barriers in terms of how organizations, health authorities, sponsors communicate with one another. And I'll get into a little bit more about the platform in my next slide. So what was the impetus? Why did we start with Project Prism? Well, it turned out, when at my time at the FDA, I left in 2016. I knew about a platform called Precision FDA. It was used for next-gen sequencing. What I didn't know in 2023 is that they had already been developing essentially what was a collaborative space. So knowing that they already had this technology, this is the first proven production cloud platform enabling real-time interactions between sponsors and health authorities. We found out that as early as 2019, that the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine had been using this platform for real-time review in the animal health space for bioinformatics review. So, of course, it begged the question. There was an opportunity for a public-private partnership. How do you essentially take that same technology that's already been leveraged for veterinary review and apply it to human drugs and biologics? And that's exactly what we did. Was the platform just some toolbox? No, this platform is actually, given that it was already production, it actually was being used for data analytics as a service, for supply chain monitoring, for the White House, for infant formulas and critical medicine shortages. And the regulatory science research component of this, there's a lot of research that happens on this platform, used a lot by oncology within FDA CEDAR for reviewing how they do things and getting data and insights. And of course, the global substance registration system is also a part of this. So this technology was already mature. The infrastructure was already in place. It was already secure. It has a status of a higher security level that's supposed to happen by the end of the year. So this was just an opportunity to say, this has already been funded. It exists. Let's go ahead and put it to its paces. Unfortunately, there was a mechanism within the FDA to have a public-private partnership, this research collaboration agreement, in order to achieve this and put it through its paces. And this is what we've been doing. So October 2023, we've started with use cases, and I don't have them all listed here, but we've already gone through 4 of these, and it has been proven successful. We were able to take an entire electronic common technical document or dossier, submit it through the process, validate it, have study data validated. We've gone through 2 phases of structured clinical protocols. So in ICH, there's a clinical protocol work stream there. We've been able to test and validate that. We've done some preliminary testing for structured CMC as well, where we did one very quick pack reliance sort of test with the technology to see if that can be leveraged for more robust testing. And you can see there are a variety of other initiatives here that are currently going through their paces. So if you look at the left, the concept is essentially private review spaces. It's a secure cloud-based environment where sponsors and regulators can collaborate in real time. Then you can see in the center, there's an interactive communication space. This is where stakeholders, pharma, biotech, CROs, and academia can connect using standard message exchange formats. And on the right, you can see the interactive review spaces. It's not just a place where you share information and you can exchange it. What's also important in this initiative is that a lot of the tools that you use for review, statistical analysis, other workstations, also exist on this environment. So if you want to perform statistical analysis, you want to basically explore more structured data, apply your artificial intelligence activities to this. We've gone through some of that and have tested that. Because all of this is integrated, the data, the applications, and all the communications flow through one single secure platform. That's how we get from siloed sequential processes to collaborative concurrent review. So I'd say, knowing this, I won't spend too much time here, but if anyone wants to reach out, in Boehringer Ingelheim, we said, well, if the platform's here, and we've already tested a full submission and validated that. We've already tested study data. We've already tested clinical protocols being structured. Could we not just decide, because of the technology, connect our regulatory information management systems directly to this, rather than just waiting till we package everything up upstream and give it to a health authority? Could we not just go upstream and connect our systems directly to connect our process flows? So in a nutshell, without going into too much detail, this is sort of the scenario that we put out there. We've made investments in these regulatory information management systems where we do a lot of our work. And in 6 weeks, we conducted a project to say, let's connect our systems directly to this cloud system so that we can seamlessly provide information and interact back and forth. And I'm happy to say that I was actually quite surprised. In 6 weeks, we were able to do that. Our plan is to put out a technical blueprint, provide a little bit more detail about how we did that. There are other companies that are looking to explore to do the same thing. I would say anyone who's interested in knowing more about how we're able to connect our systems so you can have that more efficient flow directly into a regulatory system to support our reliance, please reach out. And that was, I would say, the big holy grail moment for us is, could we actually start with how we create content in our systems, have that fully assembled and published, give it to the regulators, have that data available to them in real time for multiple regulators, not just one, enable smooth processes to achieve health authority review. Once it's gone through its paces of decision making, package that back up and stick it back into our systems. And that test, which we used for pretty much in our production systems, worked without fail. There are a couple of little things that have to be done in a subsequent phase and how we connect those, but that initial POC of being able to do it was actually quite telling and revealing. So if we're able to do that with our systems to multiple health authorities, just think about how we think that the technology now to us is solved, and we can start working on real things like the real world data use cases or other use cases that you saw on the list. So with that, I believe I'm coming up on my last slide. Larry, this is just a picture of how that was orchestrated from a technology perspective and what we did in 6 weeks. Again, we took our systems, connected them to this cloud environment, having this connector to where the regulators are, In the use case for M11, EMA was a participant, PMDA was a participant, Health Canada was an observer, along with FDA being a participant. So again, taking concept to a pilot to production, connecting our systems end to end. I think the future is now. So we know there's a lot more work to be done, but we think that from a technology perspective, that's one big piece of the puzzle that's been solved. So we can really get into probably, additional challenges that have nothing to do with technology. Last thing I'll say is, when we get earlier to market, there's a lot of things that you benefit from in terms of just resource efficiencies. And with that, Larry, Mario, I'll turn it back over to you. I do really appreciate your time. And like I said, it's a public-private partnership. Anyone who's interested in knowing more in depth about the results, please reach out. Thank you.
Wow.
Yeah. Say that again. Veda, that was really interesting. Thanks for sharing the vision of PRISM. I have a couple of questions for you, because I think our listeners will probably be interested in knowing a little bit more about the way that this works. So let's say I'm a regulator and I would like to be able to participate in a pilot or somehow get involved with this process. Do I need to load special software on my servers, on my computer, or do I just have a terminal and regular computer and access this in the cloud? Tell me a little bit about the mechanics and if it's simple or complicated.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Larry. So I'd say, obviously, on the technology layer, there's more to it. But for the non-technical people, when we took that into account, for myself being a former reviewer, saying, listen, I don't care about all the technology. I just want to know that what I need is available to me and I can use it all here. So the analogy I use is that the way this platform's been set up and how we were able to achieve it was probably as straightforward as saying, I want a Netflix account, right?
Really?
You don't have to build out the infrastructure in your organization, right? So in this pilot, we actually did secure the same platform that FDA is using for Precision FDA. But if I wanted to provide accounts to other people, those accounts just get provided. And it's a matter of signing up. You get a username and password, and then all of the tools that are there in terms of even publishing, assessments, in terms of workstations, is all available once you have your account. And today, I think even today, you could go to Precision FDA and get an account and actually use those tools. That's why we leverage that platform to do this particular regulatory thing. So, if anyone wanted to go to Precision FDA and say, I want an account because I want to do research, they could do that today. And as I said, Mario, I would say I'm simplifying it a bit, but it's a matter of saying, here's my account, here are all the tools, now do the work you want to do. Which is very, very important, right? Because infrastructure is expensive. That's sort of a 20th century way of doing things. But if you can provide access to, say, small to medium countries, industry, biotech, academia, and it's a matter of saying, I don't have to purchase all of this. I don't have to pull in that infrastructure. I can simply get an account, and get this information available to me. Very, 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 very transformative to be able to do it that way.
Fascinating. And for example, in a submission, there are always confidential information. Are there, it hides some things, or, well, I guess there are many aspects that we can talk about, and we have more things to discuss maybe for the end, but it's fascinating.
Yeah, the concept of private space is really important, right? We have a lot of intellectual property that we have from our companies that we submit to agencies. The agencies really have that obligation to want to make sure that stays secure and private. So, if someone thinks, well, I don't want to share information, a health authority wants to operate independent of, say, other authorities or companies, they have their own private space. We all have our private spaces. You interact where you can. Questions about data residency, do you have servers in these other regions? Does it meet these requirements? The only thing I can tell you in the interest of time is we did explore GDPR, 21 CFR 11, data residency, all these requirements around the world, since we're multinational companies dealing with multiple regulators from different regions. And at that layer, that was the benefit of this, is that part has been addressed, right? Hey, is it secure and private enough? The one thing to say, well, how do we have that confidence? The data that we use for these use cases is real data. We didn't put mock data. It wasn't lorem ipsum, lots of Latin, whatever. These were real submissions that we have either withdrawn or submitted in the past. and submitted that because, we figured real data shows real results. So every company who's participated is using real data. And that gives us a level of confidence that, if you have a secure and private environment, you can do things that are really closer to production than just testing them out.
Well, Veda, thanks very much. The PRISM project was not something I was intimately familiar with, and you've given us a really interesting overview of it. And so if there's anybody online who would like more information, I'm sure they can stay in touch with you through LinkedIn and through other mechanisms to figure out how they can participate in these programs.
No, thank you, Larry. We kept our head down to solve the problems, and now it's time to really kind of extend it out to really put it through its paces. So thank you for your time.
Okay, you bet. Well, now let's take a closer look at the role of reference agencies from a different point of view, from the developer's point of view. Building a robust regulatory environment requires the input of many stakeholders. Each one brings unique strengths and experiences to the mix. And as developers of products that will be used all over the world, multinational research companies such as Roche are at the forefront of optimizing the use of regulatory systems. As you've heard today, the role of reference agencies is key to this efficiency. So, to share with us her company's experience in supporting the evolution of reference agencies, we're really happy to welcome Dr. Suzanne Osborne. Suzanne is the global head of international regulatory policy at Roche. She's a key member of the EMA focus group on reliance, and her deep global experience brings a really unique perspective to this topic. So we welcome Suzanne, and Suzanne, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, Larry. And it was really inspiring also to hear Vada, because I think this is also the future, because reliance is based on transparency, and transparency is, these platforms where we can share information is really crucial for the future. I don't see my slides yet. Okay, here it goes. Yeah, so I'm representing today also the FPA International Regulatory Expert Group, and as such also the EMA focus group on reliance, because I can assure you all that industry is strongly committed to leverage reliance as a 21st century regulatory tool. And as I mentioned, reliance is based on trust, and trust comes with transparency and continuous dialogue. And I think, or I'm convinced that EMA is a leading example for a reference agency, because their system is based on transparency, and they are very open and committed to a continuous dialogue. And therefore, I would really like to expand a bit on the collaboration between the European Trade Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, so FPA, and the European Medicines Agency, what we are doing to further increase the impact of EMA as a reference agency around the globe. And maybe this is also inspiring for other trade associations or other regulators around the world. So I don't think that I have to spend too much time on the strong focus of EMA on the international activities. Maybe it's also worthwhile mentioning that EMA gets additional resources from the European Commission to support international activities. So they are really also, there's a strong commitment, but there's also budget for this. And of course, this is really important when you look at all these different activities where EMA is involved. The bilateral relations, there are many multilateral relations where EMA is involved and really driving convergence and reliance around the world. Still, there are many national regulatory authorities around the world which are leveraging EMA assessments in different ways without EMA being necessarily aware about it. And there are different reasons, because I think we have implemented reliance pathways in different forms many years ago without really a concrete structure or some requirements behind. And I think there is really a lot we can do in order to streamline those activities and drive the efficient and optimal implementation of reliance. Another important thing to mention is also that, as I said, EMA is very open for dialogue with pharmaceutical industry, and there is a link also in the slides. They have regular industry stakeholder platform meetings where representatives from the pharmaceutical industry are invited to really discuss specific topics, provide their expertise and insights in order to jointly move the needle. And in one of those stakeholder meetings, it was decided in November 2022 to form a focus group on reliance, to really discuss the possible opportunities and also the challenges in this unilateral reliance pathway. So where you really use the assessment of one reference agency to get the approval in other agencies around the world. And this focus group consists of several trades associations focusing on Europe, so FPA, UCOP, Vaccines Europe, and Europa Bio, and representatives from the International Affairs and Human Medicines Decision. And we have 3 to 4 meetings per year and some dialogue in between. And I think the first thing we did as a focus group was a survey, because it always helps to see where you stand, right? So back in 2023, we sent a survey to member companies asking countries, how much do you use EMA as reference agency and which documents are used to support reliance. And you can see that many companies, 71%, said, okay, yes, we are using EMA as reference agency. But on the right side, you can see also the statistics, which documents have been provided in order to facilitate reliance. And this is a big variety. And you can also see, if you are familiar with the topics, there's a lot of duplication, and not all of these documents are really useful reliance tools. So it was really also interesting for EMA to see which documents are shared, and we were really discussing about the value, and agreed also that it would be useful to have some recommendations on reliance tools which could be used by relying agencies. And this is just a snapshot. You can see that some countries were relying on the ECPP and approval letter, but many of them were asking for many more documents, and this doesn't really streamline the process, and it's also really a lot of duplication of efforts. So that's why we were really pleased that EMA agreed and was very willing to organize a webinar last year on regulatory reliance tools unveiled. So really a practical guide by EMA, and they were presenting about their assessment outputs, what documents they are creating during the centralized procedure, during post-approval changes for GMP inspections, also how to efficiently use the electronic CPPs, because there are still a lot of countries who don't use eCPPs and still ask for legalization, etc. And they are really encouraging the efficient use of these documents. And we were really pleased to see that we had more than 1,600 participants, and also many regulators from around the world listening to these presentations. And these are just a few snapshots from the slides, which are all publicly available. And we also have the Q&A session and the recording. And you can see that the key message was really what is published and when, and that you get all these different assessment outputs, but not everything is really needed, what is complementary and what is a duplication, and also really outlining the importance of published assessment reports, because this is a baseline for reliance for many agencies around the world. And what we also did from industry side is that we did really an analysis of all the documents which were requested by regulators, and saying, okay, what is the purpose of this document? What is the content? And where are the duplications? And then we were coming out with this kind of recommendation, which you can see on this slide, and I don't want to go into the detail, but there is a currently a publication in press. So the publication was accepted and should be published soon in the TERS journal, so available to everybody. During this webinar, we also realized that there's we already know this, but there was a strong emphasis on the need for reliance for post-approval changes. 60 to 80% of our filings are for post-approval changes, and we see a lot of opportunities to use reliance in this field. And so that's why this year in April, we had a follow-up webinar really going through the EMA post-authorization framework, explaining the variations and the renewal process, and really also describing the content of the assessment document outputs and the relevance for regulatory reliance. And I think this is really so key to understand this. For industry, but also for relying agencies to see what is available and what are really the key documents. And we have also here some recommendation jointly developed that, we don't get assessment reports for all product for all change types, right? Because we have minor changes, and which are the majority of changes, but there you very often don't get any approval letter or so, because it's just a notification. So it's really important to understand what are the outcomes and how can they be used, and how can they be also transparently shared with the relying agencies. And talking about the assessment outcomes, what we have done as company, we have started a pilot in 2023, really using the EMA assessment to accelerate the approval of post-approval change globally. And this was a change, a major drug substance process change for a monoclonal supply critical variation. And we said, okay, we are providing the same dossier as to the European agency. We are also providing the assessment report and the Q&As, which we received from EMA, and asked countries or agencies to participate in this pilot. So 84 countries were impacted by this change. 48 countries agreed to participate, which is not bad for a first pilot, I would say. And the goal was really to waive country-specific requirements, waive the testing, have one review and Q&A timeline, so really going for transparency, and by doing this, reducing the global approval timelines, which would be about 2.5 years for such a change, and gets the approval within 6.5 months. And you can see that there was interest from regulators around the world participating in this pilot, and we had, after 6.5 months, we had 40 countries approved. So meanwhile, we have 98. So one country is still pending, but it's really very encouraging. And when you see the lower part here, I think that's what all the supply colleagues will also really appreciate. You could see that there was a drastic decrease in the approval timelines, and we could implement this change 2 years ahead of projected timeline. And what I would like to highlight was also really the support from EMA and from WHO, because they were issuing an invitation letter to participating regulatory agencies. They were also participating in a kickoff meeting. And even better, they have now also formalized this whole procedure, or published some guidance for companies to engage in such pilots, and also describe in detail what support they are offering. And currently we have 12 post-approval change reliance pilots ongoing. And from industry side, we are really collecting the outcomes, sharing the experience, because we are planning to have a dialogue with EMA by the end of the year to really discuss the recommendations and how we can make this fit for the future, and have this as a kind of standard pathway. With this, I just come to some reflections. I really would like to cite Martin Harvey, the head of international affairs, he says, no agency, no matter how big, can do it all by themselves. And even more important, reliance is not outsourcing decisions, but insourcing expertise. So you are leveraging work which is done by others in order to come to your own sovereign decision. And what we see is really that platform for a continuous dialogue between the different stakeholders is really key to understand the challenges and hurdles. It's also very useful for the reference agency to get the industry feedback, to really understand how they are used as reference agency. And the constructive dialogue can really result in concrete recommendations and actions to facilitate reliance in practice. Because, I mean, implementing reliance should be a win-win-win situation for all stakeholders, and especially in the interest of patients. So with this, I know it was a lot of information in a few minutes, but I hope we could share with you some insights on what we are doing, and maybe really encourage also industry peers around the world to engage in the dialogue, collect information, collect data, and start pilots and develop the learnings.
Suzanne, thank you very, very much. Thank you for that. It was very much all-encompassing, and I learned so much about some of these newer pilots and initiatives. So a couple of questions before we bring everybody back together again. It seems as though when you were talking about the analysis of the documents that could be best used to support Reliance, that it was moving towards almost like a risk-based approach. In other words, depending on the nature of the product and the experience, things like that, that there could be almost a hierarchy, and you had that concentric circle image. And is that something that will be in the published article about recommendations around which documents are the starting points, and then which ones could add color, let's say, to the submission?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, actually, it's really a risk-based approach. And I mean, the primary documents which we are recommending is really the dossier. I think this is also something where there is sometimes the news that the relying agencies don't get a dossier. I mean, they get a dossier in CTD format, and they also will get the approval letters, they will get the GMP certificates, and they will get the EPAR. So these are the kind of primary documents. And then if the EPAR is not sufficient, then we would also share the final CHMP assessment report. I think it's also very important for us from industry that we are sharing any differences with this relying agencies very transparently. And there has been a template developed by IFPMA to really outline the differences, because I think regulators don't want to be surprised by finding out that they all of a sudden have a different manufacturing site, right? And I'm convinced that you can have a different manufacturing site, but you have to prove the evidence. You have to show comparability, you have to provide the right information. And reliance is also not all or nothing, right? So, I mean, you can rely on certain elements and do an abridged review on others. So I think, I mean, so the information will be published. And I would also really encourage you to look at the webinars which have been done by EMA last year and this year, where you can really also get some more insights.
Yeah, thank you for those links. They were very good. And you know, last year we held a webinar looking at the concept of sameness and kind of the complexities around describing sameness, and that's evolved very quickly. So we know that there are now these formats, let's call it, to be able to actually illustrate differences, and which ones are important differences and which ones aren't so important from the regulator's point of view.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yes. I mean, in the end, if you think about post-approval change, we are implementing post-approval changes all the time, right? And they are also, and then you have to prove that there is no impact on the quality, safety, and efficacy. And I think even if you have differences here, you have to prove it, and then I think you can use reliance as you.
Right. And if I think back to Veda's presentation, a question I had in looking at the pilot with the 48 agencies, was a technology used to centralize the distribution of those documents? How were those 48 agencies informed of the information that they had to use for the pilot?
So, I mean, we have a huge network of affiliates around the world. So we were reaching out to them individually upfront to check if they would be willing to buy in. So these affiliates reached out to the regulators, and then we got the feedback. And you had to do also, the submission was done via the national pathways as we always did it. But what we did was a pilot in a pilot. So we were using a cloud-based platform to share the Q&As from all the agencies with everybody. So all the questions which were coming in were shared on the platform, and also the responses. And this really helped to avoid duplicative questions. So if regulators saw, well, this question has been already raised by another agency, we don't have to ask again. So I think this was really a great first step. And I mean, the other pilots now are using the platform more and more. And of course, you can think now also expanding, putting more information, also dossiers or so in the cloud. But I think this is an evolving process.
Yes.
Mario, any thoughts?
Yes. It's fascinating first to hear Prism and now Suzanne, how EMA and FDA seem to be more engaged in reliance. It used to be in the past that, well, it was the relying agencies' struggle, get the information. It's not my it's not my function. That was the perception, as far as I recall. Now it seems, and it's very encouraging from what Suzanne just told us about EMA and the work they have done together, that they seem more engaged, and I think it will be very, very good. I don't know what you think, Suzanne.
Yeah, I think this is really an interesting observation because, I mean, of course, EMA was always, they are a strong, the leading agency in the WHO collaborative procedure pathway, right? And I mean, they also have been involved in PQ, etc. But I think over the last years and also supported by CIRS, I would say, a lot of pathways have been implemented using EMA or FDA as reference agency, right? And this has started long before WHO published their reliance guideline. So that's why we are seeing now, which is good, we are seeing a lot of reliance guidelines being established around the world, but they are all somehow a bit different. And they also don't really have clear recommendations and timelines, etc. And I think this is now really the momentum where we have to work very strongly together in order to make it happen in a best possible and the most efficient way to get it done. Because I think everybody agrees that reliance is a way forward, but the question is really the how. And that's where we need the dialogue, right? It's a good thing when you go to the nitty gritty details and you know you are already above this mountain where you have to start convincing others.
Yeah. So, Suzanne, within our department and within the Kim Center, we have student researchers and others, and we have a team that actually is addressing a question that I raised, which is, are there risks associated with reliance? So if we don't do reliance correctly, are there downsides? What are the problems? And this came from the concept that there are so many different guidelines, like you say. And if you go into FR Path, there are dozens and dozens, 80 or more reliance pathways alone in the system. So what happens if these things are not constructed and followed properly? And using an analytical technique that's been used for the electronics industry to identify risks, this team is now mapping out different kinds of reliance pathways and where the risks are at different junctures, decision points. So, hopefully in the next several months, we'll have some really good results with regard to that to inform a model for different kinds of reliance pathways, verification of bridge reviews, things like that.
And that's really cool because I think just on this, reliance is really, trust and relying on work done by others. And what we see, if you don't do it in the right way and you are getting all these documents and comparing all these documents because you don't necessarily trust, then I think you add even more resources in a relying agency. So I think this is a critical point, right? One of the critical points.
Yeah, well, let's see where our research goes. Why don't we bring everybody back in, and we have some thoughts and questions from our audience. And there's kind of a philosophical question that's been raised by one of the participants, and we've all talked about the role of the WHO, how important that has been, and this question touches on the impact of the conversations that the USA is having with regard to its relationship with WHO, the fact that some countries are also planning to leave WHO and not necessarily participate in the WLA program. And so I think what the question really has to do with is how do we ensure that the WHO continues to be a strong voice in this arena, and that we can continue to follow what WHO has put in place and be sure that it remains robust. And Asma, I'll start with you because you've had a very close relationship with WHO.
Just unmute myself. Okay. I think WHO is the one who can answer this question better than me, of course. But for me, as long as the reference, the agency I used to rely on, for example, US FDA, EMA, or whatever, I rely because, as you know, as you had just mentioned, there is data and it is an evidence-based reliance. And there is a sameness approach, that sameness commitment by the applicant. Once all these pillars and all these elements are existing and submitted to EDA, so we can rely on this authority regardless being in the WHO as member state or leaving or what, because there is, it's kind of, political or economical impact. I don't know. It's not a regulatory reason, of course. But for me as a regulator who needs to have information and data to rely on an authority. As Susan mentioned, there is a trust in this well-resourced and more resourced agency, and I can access this data, and the applicant can confirm the sameness. So I will rely on this authority, regardless being a member state or not in the WHO. I hope this can address, but for sure the accurate answer will be from WHO side.
For sure. And Suzanne, do you have some reflections? I mean, obviously we can't speak for WHO, but in terms of the overall atmosphere that's going on around the world, we know we're moving towards alignment, and we want that to happen. And what do you think? Is that continuing? And do you think that the reference agency component is an important component of that alignment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an optimist, and I think this is so obvious that that reliance is somehow the way forward. Because I mean, I like to cite also Samuel Asadian, who always said, "It's not a sign of weakness; it's a sign of strength using reliance." Right? And I mean, but it comes with a transparency, and I think this is something. And I mean, probably independent of WHO. I mean, if an agency is really transparently sharing their assessment outcomes and doing this, you know, that you can find all this information in on the website, etc. So what was the baseline? I think this will really help driving these concepts further. And I mean, we know that 70%, I think, of the agencies around the world are still maturity level 1 and 2. So they are also, I mean, if you think about the patient in those countries, you really need strong reference agencies in order to help those other agencies also to bring the products to patients.
Yeah. And Veda, a final word. Where do you see the technology bringing all of this?
Well, I think that, and that's the question I had for Susan maybe afterward, is like, just from everything that's been said, I think it's another call to action. I think based on what you've seen from the PAC results from Roche, based on the things that we've done with technology, where we're not figuring out how to do the next thing, we've already loaded entire dossiers, we're already thinking life cycle. And from everything that Dr. Fouad mentioned, I think that the time is right to say, let's start connecting these dots. There are multiple different initiatives, and everyone's working in those. So maybe it's a time for some consolidation, right? At the end of the day, you want a standard. It's not about one technology platform versus another. It's like, how do you standardize that so that it becomes ubiquitous, so that everyone can benefit from it? So I think that's where we are. So I think the next step is, now that certain problems have been solved, now that the ball has been advanced, to a certain level, how do we start connecting these dots to really kind of make this a reality?
And maybe just the one point, because I was just thinking about the ICMRA pilot. We didn't talk about this today, but right, the International Coalition of Medicinal Regulatory Authorities, where you have heads of agencies together, and they have done these pilots 2 years ago, and they are extending their pilots. They are really calling industry to submit applications to run these collaborative pilots. So you have a number of reference agencies working together also to collaborate and prepare the path for the future. I think this is maybe also a positive note, on at the end here.
Yeah, I wish we had another hour, Larry, because just one of the industry partners in PRISM was very instrumental in ICMRA in terms of the pilot, and now they're putting the pieces together to do an ICMRA 2.0 pilot, right, to kind of build off those lessons learned, which, research builds on top of research. So to your point, I completely agree. And, maybe to the apolitical point about WHO, the fact that you mentioned there's ICMRA, there's still ICH, there's other regulatory harmonization initiatives, there's other private sector and philanthropic partnerships, whether it's PATH or Gates Foundation. There are other pathways, right? It's ideal to keep it, the way, it is, to benefit from those things, but should other forces aside from, the things that we're talking about really kind of play out, there are other ways where we still have to just maybe make a pivot to continue to advancing things through these other frameworks.
Well, on that positive note, I want to thank you all. I just want to say that this has really been a fun and informative session. Really, I learned a lot today. And, today we've covered lots of ground, and we'd like to leave you with our typical recommendations, about an activity that you can consider undertaking today. today when you leave this webinar to help you and your colleagues think about the importance of reference agencies? And from our speakers, a couple of takeaway actions are: remember, trust requires transparency and dialogue between the different stakeholders. So a recommendation would be to authorities is to invest in regulatory system strengthening, as the impact is beyond the authorities. It's to the industry and the public health. So it's really a good return on investment. With authorities, you should create a dynamic list for reference agencies on which you can rely on. And especially as we have more and more WLAs coming, you should have clear selection criteria for the reference agencies that you're looking to rely on. For industry, collect data, do surveys, if and how reference agencies are used, which countries leverage assessment outcomes, and where are their appropriate documents? How can these be used for reliance? You saw some beautiful results of surveys. Where are the gaps and duplications? And so get involved with pilots, right? We've talked about a number of pilots that are out there. So the online successes and challenges are only going to be resolved by getting more and more involved with these pilots. Share your experiences with the regulators. Be open to listening to industry if you're a regulator. Provide your perspective. This is a collaboration, as you heard all day today. So ensure transparency and publish your assessment outcomes, as we heard, that is happening in Egypt and in many other countries. And organize hands-on workshops or form focus groups in your country to bring together industry and regulators and define concrete actions and ensure follow-ups for this topic. So thank you very much with regard to that. Remember, a recording of this session will be archived shortly on the FRPath website, and we're sure that you'll be using these observations that have come from our conversations today in your activities as we leave this webinar. Our next webinar will be Thursday, August 21st, and we'll continue this conversation with a deep dive into good registration and review practices and how we build trust through collaboration. So this is an area that's been evolving. How do we know that we're submitting the right information, and how do we know that the appropriate review practices are being undertaken? So the free registration links will be available shortly, both at the FRPath website and on our LinkedIn and email postings. Now, remember to check out the resources at frpath.org, where you can find more information about reliance and other facilitated regulatory pathways. So once more, Mario and I would like to extend a very special thank you to our guests, Asma, Veda, and Suzanne. Mario and I thank you for your interest and your participation, and all our best until we meet again.
Thank you.